Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
And we have quite the journey ahead of us today.
We really do. I mean, imagine just for a second that you are standing out in a dusty field, right? Like thousands of years ago. You look up at the blistering midday sun.
Yeah, and you're sweating, you're exhausted.
Exactly. But you don't see, a ball of burning hydrogen and helium like we do today. You see a terrifying, completely capricious God.
Right, a deity who could just wipe you out.
Totally.
Yeah.
You actually believe that if you don't offer the exact right sacrifices, that sun god might just decide to scorch your crops and, starve your entire family.
Which is a terrifying way to live.
It is. And you look at the raging ocean and you see this chaotic, warring monster. Like it could just swallow you whole at any given moment.
You're basically living in a state of constant low-grade terror.
Right. Perpetual terror. You're just trying to appease this pantheon of violent deities who, frankly, do not care about you at all. That was the psychological reality of the ancient world.
It was an incredibly heavy burden. I mean, the foundational worldview of the surrounding cultures back then, like the Babylonians, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, was that humanity was just an afterthought.
Like we barely mattered.
Exactly. In so many of their creation epics, humans were created simply to do the grunt work, the stuff the gods were just too lazy to do themselves.
Wow. So you were just born into a cosmic war zone.
Yeah, a war zone where you were the lowest ranking foot soldier.
And that, I think, is exactly why we are diving into the first 11 chapters of Genesis today. Because I was going through the research notes and the commentaries compiled for this deep dive, and it struck me how completely backward our modern debates actually are.
Oh, completely. We entirely missed the point.
We really do. Today, people look at these 11 chapters and immediately start screaming at each other about, carbon dating or the fossil record or whether it was literal 24-hour days.
Right, missing the forest for the trees.
Exactly. But the mission of our exploration here is entirely different. We are not here to debate modern science or parse out literal history.
No, we're looking for the underlying meaning.
Right. So whether you are approaching this text from a deeply religious background or you are coming to it out of pure secular curiosity, the goal is to extract the profound practical wisdom, the moral insight, and the incredibly sharp psychology embedded in this ancient text.
Because it is incredibly sharp.
It really is. Because, like it or not, these chapters essentially form the foundational grammar of Western thought.
They absolutely do. And, to understand the shockwave this text sent through history, we really have to keep that ancient, terrified audience in mind.
The people in that dusty field.
Yes, them. Genesis offered them this radical alternative vision of reality. It proposed an architecture of the universe that was based not on chaos and divine violence, but on order, purpose, and human dignity.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start right at the beginning. The architecture of reality in Genesis 1 and 2.
The creation account.
Right. And I was reading the notes on a 19th century commentary by a scholar named Albert Barnes, and he points out just how incredibly subversive the first chapter of Genesis was.
Subversive is the perfect word for it, actually.
Right. He basically argues that it was a philosophical earthquake, like it was designed to dismantle the fear of the ancient world.
Let's look at the mechanisms of how Genesis 1 actually operates against the backdrop of the ancient Near East. If you read, say, the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish creation, happens because the patron god, Marduk, slaughters this terrifying sea dragon goddess named Tiamat.
Wow, okay. That's graphic.
It is. He rips her corpse in half and uses half of her bloody body to make the sky and the other half to make the earth.
That's incredibly dark.
Right. The world is built on violence and the remains of dead monsters. Now, contrast that with the opening lines of Genesis.
There's no cosmic battle.
None at all. There is no struggling. There is just a singular, intentional creator simply speaking reality into existence.
Barnes notes that the text deliberately denies atheism, pantheism, and polytheism all at exactly the same time. But the part that honestly blew my mind in the notes was how the text treats the sun and the moon.
The demotion. It's brilliant.
It really is. Because in the surrounding cultures, the sun and moon were supreme deities, right? Like Shamash, the sun god, and Sin, the moon god.
Very powerful, highly feared gods.
But Genesis doesn't even give them their proper names. It almost feels intentionally disrespectful to the pagan religions. It just calls them the greater light and the lesser light.
It is a massive cosmic demotion. I mean, the author is essentially reducing these terrifying worship deities to the level of, well, municipal infrastructure.
Haha, municipal infrastructure, that's great.
But it's true. They aren't gods. They're just lamps hung in the sky. The text explicitly says they are there to serve as clocks for signs and seasons and for days and years.
Think about how liberating that would be for an ancient reader.
Exactly. You don't have to worship the sun anymore. You don't have to fear it.
It's just a tool created by a rational God to help you keep time.
Which completely shifts the entire paradigm of how you view your life.
But before we get to the populated Earth, the text starts with this incredibly evocative phrase. It says the Earth was formless and empty.
Tohu vabohu in Hebrew.
Right, tohu vabohu. A waste and a void. It's the ultimate state of unlivable chaos. And the way God deals with this chaos is mathematically precise.
It is a masterpiece of logical progression. You see, the ancient mind craved order above all else, and Genesis 1 delivers it in a perfectly symmetrical two-part process.
How so? Like, break that down.
Well, God doesn't just snap his fingers and make a finished globe. He systematically solves the tohu vabohu. The first 3 days are entirely dedicated to fixing the formless part of the problem. He builds the habitats.
Okay, so laying the foundation.
Right. Day 1, he separates light from dark, creating time. Day 2, he separates the waters above from the waters below, creating space and weather. Day 3, he separates the dry land from the sea, creating agriculture and habitat.
So he basically builds the house first.
Exactly. And then the next 3 days are dedicated to solving the empty part of the problem. He populates the habitats he just built in the exact same order.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, day 4 fills day 1. He creates the sun, moon, and stars to rule the light and dark. Day 5 fills day 2. He creates birds and fish to inhabit the sky and the waters.
And day 6 fills day 3.
You got it. He creates animals and ultimately humanity to inhabit the dry land. It is a highly structured, poetic polemic that screams, the universe is not an accident and it is not a war zone.
It is a carefully designed temple.
Exactly.
But hold on, let me push back here for a second. Because while that symmetry is beautiful, the text uses language that really trips up modern readers.
Oh, sure. The ancient cosmology.
Right. In the notes, Barnes calls this phenomenal language, meaning it describes things exactly as they appear to the naked eye of an ancient observer.
Right.
For example, on day 2, it talks about God making a firmament or an expanse to separate the waters below from the waters above.
The solid dome.
Yeah, ancient people literally thought there was a solid dome over the flat Earth, holding back a cosmic ocean. So doesn't this ancient pre-scientific cosmology make it incredibly hard for us to take the text seriously today? I mean, we know there isn't a literal ocean of water hovering in outer space above our atmosphere.
That is the exact tension that causes so many people to throw the text out entirely. But we have to practice wisdom with discernment here.
Okay, how do we do that?
We must distinguish between the enduring mechanism of truth, which is God's intentional, orderly design, and the vantage point of the ancient observer. I mean, why didn't God inspire the author of Genesis to write about the vacuum of space, the spherical nature of the globe, and quantum mechanics?
Because it would have been gibberish to them.
Exactly. It wouldn't have meant anything to a wandering shepherd 3,000 years ago.
You know, I was trying to think of how to conceptualize this, and it feels a lot like explaining the internet to a toddler.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Because you don't sit a 3-year-old down and start explaining fiber optic cables, binary codes, server farms, and TCP/IP protocols.
They just stare at you.
Completely blank stare. If you did that, they wouldn't understand a single word, and it would completely alienate them. Instead, you use concepts they can already grasp.
You speak their language.
Yes. You say it's like a giant invisible library where all the computers talk to each other to share pictures and stories. Now, is that a scientifically accurate description of the internet's architecture? No. But does it communicate the functional truth in a way the audience can actually understand and engage with?
Yes. Yes, it does. That is an excellent way to look at it. The divine is accommodating human limitation.
Taking them where they are.
Right. The author didn't have a telescope. When they looked up, the sky was blue and water fell from it. Ergo, there must be water up there, held back by some kind of barrier.
Makes logical sense given their tools.
Exactly. The mechanism of ancient cosmology isn't the point of the text. The meaning of creation is. The text is using the cultural furniture of the day to teach a radical theology, that the world is safe, ordered, and governed by a benevolent architect.
And the psychological insights embedded in that accommodated language are just staggering. once you stop fighting the science.
They really are.
Like, take the rhythm of day and night.
Yeah.
Matthew Henry, another classic commentator from our research, points out something fascinating. He asks why God established this rotating division of light and darkness, day and night, so that we pass from one to the other every 24 hours.
And what's his conclusion?
His conclusion is that it is to teach us to expect vicissitudes in life. We are meant to experience this constant rotation of peace and trouble, joy and sorrow.
Wow. It normalizes hardship.
Yes. If the universe itself is built on a rhythm of light and shadow, we shouldn't be paralyzed by shock when the night comes in our own lives, our careers, or our relationships.
Because it is woven into the very fabric of reality.
And that rhythm culminates in what might be the most vital architectural feature of reality presented in these chapters, the Sabbath, the seventh day.
Right, the day of rest.
God ceases from his work. And what is so striking is that an omnipotent creator obviously doesn't get physically tired.
No, God didn't need a nap.
Exactly. God didn't rest out of exhaustion. He rested from the deep satisfaction of completion.
Which is a remarkably foreign concept to the modern mind. I mean, we rest only when we collapse.
True.
The Sabbath principle in Genesis is not about recovering so you can work harder on Monday. It is about stopping to enjoy the inherent goodness of what has been made. It is declaring independence from the endless cycle of production.
Which brings us to a massive practical question for you, the listener, right now. Are you respecting the Sabbath principle in your own 247 hyper-connected life?
It's so hard to do today.
It is. We live in an era where the inbox is never empty, the social media feed never stops refreshing, and the hustle is just culturally glorified. But the foundational rhythm of reality demands a pause.
A full stop.
So, do you ever pause to look at your work, your family, your life, and declare it good? Or are you trapped in a cycle of endless productivity where nothing you do is ever enough?
If you never stop to declare a thing finished, you just become a slave to the very things you are building.
That is so true.
The tragedy, of course, is that the narrative doesn't let humanity stay in that perfect, restful state for long. The architecture is built, but the inhabitants immediately begin to dismantle it.
Which moves us into Genesis 3, and what I want to call the anatomy of a mistake. We are in the Garden of Eden.
The fall of humanity.
Yeah. And right away in the text, there's a subtle but massive shift in how God is described. In chapter 1, the text uses the name Elohim for God. This translates roughly to the everlasting, almighty, transcendent God of the cosmos.
The big, distant creator.
Right. But when we get to chapters 2 and 3, focusing on the creation of humanity, the text introduces a new divine name, Yahweh Elohim.
The Lord God. It is the relational, personal name of the divine.
It signifies a profound shift in focus.
It really does. The transcendent creator who was just, organizing galaxies and separating cosmic waters is now stepping into an intimate conversational relationship with humanity. He's depicted as walking in the garden in the cool of the day.
Just going for a stroll with him.
Exactly. And it is in this environment of immense intimacy and provision that the great fracture occurs.
Enter the serpent. And I have to say, the psychology of temptation detailed here is an absolute masterclass.
It really is.
It maps so perfectly onto how we self-sabotage today. The commentaries in our notes break down the serpent's strategy into 3 very distinct manipulative steps.
Well, let's hear them.
First, it starts with a simple question to destabilize the rule. The serpent asks Eve, "Has God really said you shall not eat of any tree of the garden?" It plants a seed of doubt, not about God's existence, but about God's goodness.
It is classic psychological framing. I mean, the reality was incredibly generous. They could eat from literally millions of trees with only one single boundary. But the serpent reframes that generous reality into a restrictive, oppressive one. He focuses all of Eve's attention on the one thing she cannot have.
And once the boundary is questioned and resentment is introduced, the serpent moves to the second step, outright denial of the consequences. You won't really die.
It's the rationalization we all use right before we make a terrible decision.
Oh, 100%. It's not that big of a deal. Nobody is going to find out. The rules don't actually apply to me.
We do it every day.
We do. And then comes the final blow, the third step, appealing to ambition and ego. The serpent says, God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
The ultimate hook.
Yeah, the serpent convinces Eve that she is being deliberately held back, that God is hoarding power, and that by breaking the rules, she can elevate herself to divine status.
Notice the vectors through which this temptation operates. The text describes Eve looking at the tree, and she experiences a massive sensory and psychological overload.
Breaking down her defenses.
Exactly. It says she saw that the tree was good for food. That targets appetite. It was a delight to the eyes. That targets aesthetics. And it was desired to make one wise. That targets ambition.
Appetite, aesthetics, ambition.
Yes. If you deconstruct any modern marketing campaign, any social media algorithm designed to keep you scrolling, or any ethical compromise in the corporate world, they operate through these exact same three vectors.
It is chilling how accurate that is.
It's human nature perfectly diagnosed.
So the fruit is eaten, the boundary is broken, but it's what happens after the mistake that feels so painfully universally human. Their eyes are opened, but instead of feeling like gods, they feel naked.
They feel shame.
So they hide. God comes walking in the garden and asks Adam a profoundly simple question. Where are you? He knows where they are physically, but he's forcing them to confront where they are morally.
Right. He asks, have you eaten from the tree?
And immediately, we witness the invention of the blame game.
It is a breathtaking display of evasion. Adam doesn't step up. He doesn't say, I failed, I broke the boundary. Instead, he points the finger in two directions at once.
He really throws everyone under the bus.
He does. He says, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate.
Wow.
He subtly blames God for putting the woman there in the first place, and he overtly blames Eve for handing him the fruit.
It's incredible passive aggression.
It's
her fault, but really it's your fault for bad management.
Yeah, exactly.
And then God turns to Eve, and she does the exact same thing. She points at the snake. The serpent deceived me, and I ate. Nobody takes accountability.
None at all.
And you can see how the rupture in their relationship with the divine immediately, instantaneously, causes a rupture in their relationship with each other. The intimacy is destroyed by defensive posturing.
And if we broaden our view for a moment to comparative insight, this isn't just a Hebrew theological concept. This desire to be like gods, to overreach our human limits and reject our natural boundaries, is the tragic flaw of hubris recognized across almost every major wisdom tradition in the world.
Like Icarus.
Yes, the Greek myth of Icarus flying too close to the sun because he believed his wax wings made him equal to the gods. It is the human ego refusing to accept its creaturely status.
So how does this ancient psychology translate to you, the listener, today? The practical application here is brutally direct. You have to practice catching yourself in the blame cycle.
It's a hard mirror to look into.
It really is. Think about your own life for a second. When a project fails at work, when a heated argument erupts in your relationship, when you drop the ball on a major commitment, who is the very first person you point the finger at? Where are you hiding among the trees to avoid looking in the mirror?
Because Adam and Eve's instinct is our baseline human instinct. The anatomy of a mistake always ends in shifting the blame. But if we don't arrest that blame shifting, if we don't take accountability for our actions, the alienation doesn't just stay a low-grade shame, it ferments, it escalates.
Which drives the narrative forward with terrifying speed into Genesis 4-6. The escalation of alienation.
Things get dark fast.
Very fast.
Oh.
Adam and Eve are exiled from the garden, and immediately their internal shame mutates into external violence in the very next generation. We meet their sons, Cain and Abel.
The first brothers.
Right. Cain brings an offering from the fruit of the ground, and Abel brings the firstborn of his flock. God respects Abel's offering, but not Cain's.
And we don't entirely know why, mechanically?
No, the text doesn't explicitly explain the mechanics of why one was rejected and the other accepted, though many scholars in our notes suggest it had to do with the attitude of the heart or bringing the first and best versus just bringing an obligatory leftover.
Right, checking a box.
Exactly. But the result is clear. Cain is furious. His face falls. And then we get this incredibly penetrating psychological intervention from God.
It is arguably one of the most profound verses regarding human nature in the entire text.
Seriously.
According to the translation we are using, God comes to Cain and asks, "Why are you angry? If you do well, won't it be lifted up? But if you don't do well, sin crouches at the door. Its desire is for you, but you are to rule over it."
Sin crouches at the door. That imagery is wild.
It is. The text personifies sin not as an abstract concept, but as a predatory beast. It's like a leopard waiting on the porch, sensing the heat of your resentment, just waiting for you to crack the door open in a moment of unchecked anger.
It's just waiting to pounce.
But the truly revolutionary part of that verse is the final command. You are to rule over it.
That puts the ball back in human hands.
Exactly. In the ancient world, people often believed they were simply pawns of the gods or victims of fate. If you felt murderous rage, it was because a spirit of rage had overtaken you.
The devil made me do it.
Exactly. But Genesis establishes fundamental human agency. Yes, the predatory impulses are real: jealousy, rage, bitterness, the desire to retaliate. But humans have the freedom, the capacity, and the absolute responsibility to master those impulses.
We are not slaves to our biochemistry or our emotions. We have a choice.
But Cain fails the test.
He does. He opens the door, the beast pounces, and he leads his brother out into a field and murders him. The first human death in history isn't natural, it's a fratricide.
It's tragic.
It really is. Now, as we trace Cain's lineage and read on through chapters 4 and 5, I have to admit this is where I think a lot of modern readers, hit a massive wall.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. You are referring to the genealogy.
Yes, the endless lists of names. So-and-so lived 800 years and begot so-and-so. We see these staggering lifespans, Methuselah living to 969 years old.
Right.
I mean, I'll be honest, whenever I hit chapter 5, I usually just skim it. And then right after that, we hit this bizarre, incredibly confusing passage in Genesis 6 about the Nephilim.
The giants.
Yeah, it says these giants were on the earth, and the sons of God were marrying the daughters of men. As a modern reader, it feels like we've suddenly stumbled out of a profound psychological drama and into a high fantasy novel like Lord of the Rings.
It does feel very jarring.
Like, what are we supposed to do with this? Because my instinct is to just skip it entirely.
It is a very common stumbling block. But if you skip it, you really miss the profound literary purpose of these chapters. The key here is to not get bogged down in trying to scientifically prove the biological mechanics of a 900-year lifespan.
Right.
Or trying to biologically classify who the Nephilim actually were. We have to look at what the author is trying to communicate about the trajectory of human culture.
Okay, unpack that for me. Because to me, it just looks like a confusing myth.
Let's start with the lifespans. If you look at other ancient Near Eastern texts, like the Sumerian king list, they also record the reigns of ancient ancestors.
Okay.
But in the Sumerian list, kings live for 20,000 or 40,000 years. They are depicted as literal gods.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the Genesis author is actually taking this known cultural trope of ancient, long-lived ancestors and drastically demythologizing it. The biblical lifespans are shockingly conservative compared to the surrounding cultures.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And more importantly, notice how every single entry in the Genesis genealogy ends. And he died, and he died, and he died.
The ultimate equalizer.
Yes, it is the relentless drumbeat of mortality. The author is proving that no matter how long you live, the consequence of the garden remains.
That completely changes how I read those lists. It's not a biology textbook. It's a theological statement that death reigns.
Exactly.
But what about the Nephilim? Who are these sons of God taking human wives?
Well, there are dozens of theories, ranging from fallen angels interbreeding with humans to the righteous line of Seth intermarrying with the wicked line of Cain.
Okay.
But many ancient historians believe the text is actually offering a sharp critique of ancient tyrants.
Okay.
In the surrounding cultures, kings and warlords constantly claim to be part divine, sons of the gods, in order to justify their absolute power and their right to take any woman they wanted for their harems.
Ah, right. It was a power grab.
Exactly. The Nephilim, which translates to the fallen ones, were these ancient heroes, the men of renown. But Genesis strips them of their glorious mythology. It doesn't celebrate them as demigods.
It exposes them as violent despots.
Right, despots whose arrogance and boundary crossing accelerates the corruption of the earth.
Wow. So the text is actively subverting the hero worship of ancient warlords. It's saying, these guys you think are glorious demigods, they're actually the reason the world is falling apart.
That's the exact message.
And you can see that corruption compounding in the line of Cain. Because alongside this moral decay, we see rapid technological and cultural progress.
Yes, the exponential growth of human capability. In Genesis 4, we read about Jabal, who pioneers nomadic agriculture and livestock. We read about his brother Jubal, who invents the harp and the flute, the birth of the arts. And then we have Tubal-Cain, who is the first metallurgist, forging tools of bronze and iron. Humanity is mastering the earth. They are becoming incredibly capable.
But the tragedy is that this technological boom happens in a moral vacuum.
A total moral vacuum.
Because right alongside the inventor of bronze and iron, we meet a man named Lamech. And Lamech represents the peak of this cultural development. And what does he do with this new power? He writes a poem boasting to his multiple wives about disproportionate revenge.
It's an awful poem.
It really is. He says, I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for bruising me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold.
It is a terrifying escalation. God had placed a mark of protection on Cain to stop a cycle of blood vengeance.
To limit the violence.
Right. But Lamech takes that divine grace and twists it into a license for absolute unrestrained violence. He is essentially saying, if you step on my toe, I will use my new bronze weapons to wipe out your entire family.
And isn't that the ultimate modern translation of this ancient text? Technological advancement does not equal moral progress.
We constantly confuse the two.
We really do. We can split the atom, we can map the human genome, we can invent a global internet that connects billions of people instantly. We have incredibly sharp metaphorical swords of bronze and iron.
The sharpest in history.
But if we haven't mastered the beast crouching at the door, if our hearts are still driven by fear, pride, and resentment, we will just use those advanced tools to escalate our capacity for vengeance and cruelty.
Exactly. We mistake our technological sophistication for moral evolution, but the human condition remains exactly the same.
It makes me think about how we engage with each other online today. The internet is our modern bronze. But how often do we use it to exact 77-fold revenge on someone who slightly offended us?
Oh, all the time. The public shaming.
The cancel culture. The disproportionate outrage that destroys someone's life over a misunderstood tweet. We have godlike technology, but we still have the emotional maturity of Cain in the field.
Which leads us to a very sharp, practical question for you, the listener. How do you handle your own anger?
Great question.
When you are wronged, whether it is a slight in your family, a professional betrayal at work, or an infuriating comment online, do you seek proportionate justice and reconciliation? Or do you default to the 77-fold revenge of Lamech in your words and actions?
Do you use your power to de-escalate, or do you escalate the violence?
Because if you look at the text, the escalation doesn't end well. It never does. The text says that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and the earth was filled with violence.
Which brings us to Genesis chapter 7 through 9. The story of Noah, the flood, and the persistence of human flaws.
The flood narrative is one of the most famous stories in human history, and variations of it are found across many ancient cultures. But again, the Genesis account has a very specific, deeply subversive theological point to make.
How so?
The flood is described essentially as a cosmic decreation.
Decreation, meaning running Genesis 1 in reverse.
Precisely. If you recall, God created order by separating the chaotic waters above from the waters below, letting the dry land appear.
Right.
But in Genesis 7, because the earth is so saturated with corruption and violence, God undoes that architectural work. The text says the windows of the heavens were opened, and the fountains of the great deep burst forth. The chaotic waters crash back over the ordered land. Chaos reclaims the creation.
And I want to pause here on the emotional resonance of this because the notes point out a staggering contrast. I mentioned earlier that we shouldn't skip over the why.
Right, the motivation.
If you read the Babylonian flood myth, the Epic of Atrahasis, the gods decide to flood the earth because humans are multiplying too fast and making too much noise.
Literally just being too loud.
Yes. The head god, Enlil, literally can't get any sleep because the humans are too loud. So out of sheer annoyance, he decides to exterminate them.
It's so petty.
Incredibly petty. But look at the motivation of the God of Genesis.
It is entirely different. The text uses incredibly deep, sorrowful language. It doesn't depict a cold, annoyed, calculating judge. It says that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great, and it grieved him to his heart.
God is heartbroken. He doesn't flood the earth because he's annoyed by noise. He floods the earth because humans are tearing each other apart.
The violence of his creation brings the Creator to tears.
So he decides to hit the ultimate reset button. He finds one righteous man, Noah, and calls him to build an ark to preserve a remnant of life.
And here we find another brilliant insight from Matthew Henry's commentary regarding the mechanics of the ark. God gives Noah very specific instructions, including the command to coat the ark with pitch, both inside and out, to make it completely waterproof.
Right.
Henry points out that this physical requirement is a perfect metaphor for preserving the soul in a corrupted world.
I love this part. You have to pitch your life inside and out to prevent the toxic waters of a violent culture from soaking into you and sinking you.
You have to make yourself impermeable to the cultural decay around you by setting clear boundaries.
Exactly. So Noah obeys. The flood comes, it wipes the slate completely clean, the chaotic waters eventually recede, and Noah and his family step out onto a brand new, washed, purified earth.
It is a total reboot for humanity.
But here's the twist, and it is a really dark one. The reset button doesn't actually fix the core issue.
Not at all. It exposes the grand illusion of the clean slate.
Think about what happens. As soon as Noah is on dry land, he plants a vineyard. He makes wine, he gets blackout drunk inside his tent, and a deeply shameful, fracturing incident occurs involving his son Ham seeing his father's nakedness.
Right. The details are murky, but the result is a curse in a fractured family.
The very first thing that happens in the shiny new world is a repetition of the exact dysfunction of the old world.
Because a change of scenery cannot cure a condition of the heart. The flood washed the physical earth, but it couldn't wash the human inclination towards selfishness, pride, and error.
I think we all fall for this illusion today. I call it the suitcase analogy.
Oh, let's hear it.
Imagine you are deeply unhappy in your life. Your job is stressful, your relationships are toxic, you have bad habits. So you decide to pack up your life and move across the country to a brand new city.
We've all been there.
Right. You tell yourself a fresh start will fix everything. But 6 months later, you realize you have the exact same interpersonal conflicts at your new job, and you are engaging in the exact same bad habits.
Because you brought yourself with you.
Exactly. Why? Because you packed yourself in the suitcase.
Yay.
You brought the core problem with you. The beast is still crouching at the door of your brand new apartment.
The human heart survived the flood intact. So this raises a profound theological question within the narrative. What does God do now? If a global flood doesn't fix the internal human condition, is the human project a failure? Will God just keep wiping them out every few centuries?
This is where we see the mechanism of ancient covenant making come into play, specifically the covenant of the rainbow in Genesis 9.
A huge moment.
God puts his bow in the clouds. And notice what God says in his heart. It's almost shocking. He says, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth.
He explicitly acknowledges that humanity is still flawed.
Yes.
The flood didn't cure the underlying disease. But instead of threatening further destruction, the rainbow serves as a unilateral promise from the divine to restrain his own power. In the ancient world, a bow was not a cute, colorful meteorological phenomenon. A bow was a weapon of war. It shot arrows that killed people.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that literal translation. A bow in the sky.
Yes. God is taking his weapon of war, and he is hanging it up in the sky, unstrung, and pointed away from the earth.
That is incredible.
He is essentially saying, I know they are broken, I know they will fail again and again, but I am hanging up my weapon. I will absorb the grief of their rebellion rather than destroy them. It is a profound embrace of humanity in all its messy, flawed reality.
It signals that the ultimate solution to human brokenness will not be found in global destruction or forced compliance.
Precisely.
That is incredibly poignant. And the practical reflection for us here is to look at our own tendency to search for those clean slates rather than doing the hard internal work.
We all want the easy way out.
We do. Are you trying to escape your internal struggles by constantly changing your external environment? Do you jump from job to job, relationship to relationship, city to city, hoping the next one will magically fix the unrest inside of you? The story of Noah warns us that you can never outrun your own heart.
You cannot build a perfect world by simply running away from the broken one.
Which brings us to the final narrative in our deep dive today. A story where humanity tries to solve its own insecurity, not by running, but by building. We move to Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, and the ultimate illusion of control.
The big tower.
After the flood, the descendants of Noah began to multiply, and the text says they all share one language and one common speech. They migrate eastward to a plain in the land of Shinar, which is ancient Babylon. And they say to one another, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.
Let's analyze the psychology and the driving motivation here. We have to connect this back to the very first chapter of Genesis.
Wow.
What was the original creation mandate God gave to humanity?
He told them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth.
Exactly. Fill the earth, spread out, explore, cultivate the wild, diverse globe. But what do the people at Babel do? They are driven by an intense collective fear.
They literally say, "Lest we be scattered."
They are terrified of the unknown. And driven by that fear and the desire for legacy and control, let us make a name for ourselves, they decide to do the exact opposite of the divine mandate.
They refuse to spread out.
They cluster together, they centralize all human power, language, and culture into one location, and they decide to build a massive monument to their own ego.
And the notes highlight an architectural detail here that I completely missed on my own. The text specifically points out the building materials.
The bricks.
Yes, it says, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. Why take up valuable papyrus to explain their masonry techniques?
Because it symbolizes a total reliance on human artifice.
Exactly. In ancient Israel, altars were made of uncut, natural stone, symbolizing reliance on what God had provided. But here in Babylon, they are manufacturing uniform, standardized bricks. They are taking the natural world God made and replacing it entirely with a synthetic, human-manufactured reality.
They are building a fortress to insulate themselves from the wildness and unpredictability of God's world.
A completely controlled environment.
A ziggurat, which is likely what the Tower of Babel was essentially an artificial mountain. In ancient Mesopotamian religion, ziggurats were built as stairways for the gods to come down to earth, where the priests would feed them and care for them. It was a way of capturing a deity, keeping them localized, and therefore controlling them. It is the ultimate expression of religious hubris. It is the human desire to engineer our own salvation, to dictate the terms of our relationship with the divine, and to build our way up to the heavens on our own terms.
And the modern translation of this ancient project is glaringly obvious. Babel is the ultimate warning against the dangers of monoculture and totalitarianism.
Uniformity at all costs.
Right. When you have a society where everyone has one language, and I don't just mean linguistic language, I mean one approved way of thinking, one acceptable narrative, and there's absolutely no diversity of thought allowed. There's no check on human ambition.
None at all.
It becomes a relentless machine that inevitably crushes the individual for the sake of the collective project.
It is the absolute centralization of power without the mitigation of diverse dissenting perspectives.
Think about it like a modern tech monopoly.
Okay, lay it out.
Picture a massive global platform where one entity controls all the communication, all the data, and all the algorithms that dictate exactly what we see, hear, and believe. That entity is essentially building a modern Tower of Babel.
It creates a closed loop.
An echo chamber, completely insulated from accountability. It tells the public, we will engineer the perfect society, we will connect the whole world, we will reach the heavens. Just hand over all your autonomy, your data, and your diverse perspectives to the platform.
It's the promise of utopia built on the requirement of absolute conformity.
Yes.
And how does the divine respond to this centralized synthetic empire? The text says God comes down, confuses their language so they cannot understand each other's speech, and scatters them over the face of all the earth. The city building ceases.
Now, traditionally, every time I have heard this story taught, it has been read strictly as a divine punishment.
Same here.
Like God smacking down human pride because they were getting too big for their britches.
It is a judgment on their pride, certainly. But if we look deeper at the mechanisms of the human heart that we've explored so far, we can view the confusion of languages as a profound, necessary act of mercy.
Mercy. How is a fragmenting humanity a mercy?
Because a perfectly unified, totalitarian humanity that is driven by a fallen, selfish nature is capable of infinite horror.
Oh, that makes sense.
If everyone thinks exactly the same way, and that way is fundamentally flawed by the beast crouching at the door, they will build a hell on earth.
Wow.
By confusing their language and breaking their artificial unity, God forces diversity upon them. He prevents the ultimate consolidation of tyrannical power. The scattering actually forces them to do what they were originally created to do: inhabit, explore, and cultivate the diverse regions of the world.
So diversity stops the tyranny.
Exactly. The multiplicity of cultures, languages, and perspectives becomes a built-in safety valve against global tyranny.
Wow, I have never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
The fragmentation of Babel is actually a protective gift. It stops the echo chamber from becoming a global prison.
It's a brilliant paradigm shift.
Which leaves us with a highly relevant practical question for you today. Where in your own life are you building a tower to secure your legacy out of a fear of the unknown?
That's a challenging question.
It is. Are you clustering together, surrounding yourself only with people who speak your exact language, people who vote exactly like you, think exactly like you, consume the exact same media as you? If you are living in a self-constructed echo chamber, demanding uniformity from everyone around you, you might be missing the protective gift of diverse perspectives.
You might be building a tiny Babel.
Exactly, a tiny Babel, when you were actually called to step out into the wider, more complex, and more diverse world.
That is the enduring, penetrating wisdom of these ancient chapters. They hold up an uncompromising mirror to the constant tensions of the human condition.
Order versus chaos.
Accountability versus blame, agency versus victimhood, the desire for vengeance versus the necessity of mastery, and the illusion of absolute control versus the beauty of diverse community.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, almost provocative thought to end on today. If you step back and look at the macro-level narrative arc we've just traced from Genesis 1 to 11, it functions as a prologue, showing how humanity repeatedly fractures itself on a global scale.
Time and time again.
We go from the perfection of Eden to the global violence of the flood to the totalitarian empire of Babel. Humanity tries to build utopia, fails, gets wiped out, starts over, tries to build utopia again, and fails again.
A cycle of grand failure.
And the text leaves us hanging on a massive cliffhanger. If global resets don't work, and building massive, centralized towers doesn't work, how does the brokenness of the world actually get fixed?
That is the million-dollar question the text is designed to set out.
And the answer it provides is incredibly subversive, because the very next chapter, Genesis 12, shifts the camera away from the entire globe. It moves away from massive empires, cosmic floods, and ziggurats reaching to the heavens.
It zooms all the way in.
It zooms all the way in on a single, elderly, nomadic couple, Abram and Sarai, living in the middle of nowhere, with no children and no legacy. And God speaks to them. The provocative thought I want you to mull over as we finish is this. True restoration of the world doesn't start with top-down, centralized human empires.
It never does.
It doesn't start with building bigger tech monopolies or hitting global reset buttons. It starts incredibly small. It starts local. It starts relational. It starts with one family choosing to trust a voice calling them out of the comfortable echo chamber of Babylon and stepping faithfully into the unknown. That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.